listeners of Gamera 2 panel. I am your co-host, Kent, and with me is your other co-host,
Jason. What's going on?
25 years of my favorite of the Heisei Gamera trilogy films, Gamera 2, and a film that in a different type of dub is probably
How did I
our
know that you're
most
going to get into
our
this right away?
most favorite Gamera film in that context, but a type of dub that so many fans, for such silly reasons, hate. And yeah, I love this film. I love Lake Texarkana Gamera. Um, I do love this film, and I have to say, folks, for those who hate on the Lake Texarkana Gamera dub, watching that numerous times helped me just love this film even more. It's not just because when I did watch the film, that sometimes I would hear the funny dialogue in my head during
Oh yeah,
certain scenes,
or
but
music.
I just grew to love it more. It's just one of those things where even in a general sense, when you watch a movie numerous times, more times than not, you end up falling in love with it. And Jason, let's just get right into it. Just kind of overall thoughts on Gamera 2 at this point, and just kind of if you had to rate it out of 10 stars, where would it sit right now for you?
It's one of the I would say out of the three Heisei Gamer films, I'd say it's probably one of the better ones because to me, in my opinion, even when it comes to the third film, I think with this film, I think the stakes are a little bit higher compared to the third one, even though you get, you know, Gamera close, you know,
And the
dying
Gauss Swarm.
and yeah, the Gauss Swarm right at the end there with the cliffhanger and everything. I think with this one, it to me the stakes are a little bit higher because you get a alien life form that comes down that's sort of like kind of like a locust and or parasite, kind of
Yeah, I
a
was gonna say
combination,
Parasite.
kind of a combination of the two, and that when they construct these humongous flower-like things, and once they like do a launch and project these things into space, they cause a whole lot of destruction. Basically, something about the as destructive as a nuclear weapon, so to speak. It destroys an entire city for that matter. So you can say, with that in mind, and then them, you know, tr- metamorphosizing into or combining with one another into a giant like monster that Gamera faces off towards the end. With with that said, I think this movie has more higher stakes than I would say than any of the Gamera movies that have been made. Not just
Hmm.
the three, not just the other two Heisei movies that I just mentioned about, but out of all the Gamera films that have been made up to this point, I would say this has the most stakes than any other Gamera film.
And your rating?
And my rating for this one, and I know that it's been a long time since we've mentioned about this, but over the years, and I haven't really watched it a whole lot since. But if I were to rate it now, and from what I'm thinking, minus the whole like Tix Arcana Gamera thing, because in my opinion, I think I've watched that more than the actual film
I
itself. Um,
have to.
I would actually give this. I would say around a 7.5 to 8 out of
Oh,
10. Um, and I can't. I'm not sure as far as some of the criticisms. I know we'll get more into it, and I'll probably come up with something along the ways. But yeah, as far as what makes it a good film, not just the kaiju battles. I mean, that's sort of a given per se. But as far as the characters in this film, as well as the story and the visual effects, a lot of things just went really well for this film. I mean, I really like the human characters. It just really felt like an actual Gamera movie. Even with Gamera Guardian of the Universe, the predecessor to this film, I think this film fit more along the lines of a Gamera film than I probably would say Gamera 3 or um, Super Monster Gamer, obviously. Um, yeah, it's a really good Gamera movie.
Yeah, for me, again, it's my second overall favorite Gamera film. My favorite being Gamera the Brave. That film just really hits a chord with me that most of the other Gamera films don't. And I'm not saying I dislike them. I mean, I used to be, and I think I've talked about this a few times on the podcast over the course of 8 or 9 years now since I rediscovered the older Gamera films, the Showa era. Um, I remember when you got some of those Showa era Gamera films on tape back in the late 90s, early 2000s. And I remember watching a couple of them like Jiger and Gauss and Giron. I remember those three specifically. I was like, they aren't too bad. Like, but I
I
was
know.
still in this mindset of Gamera's just a Godzilla wannabe.
Yeah,
Gamera can just, jump off a cliff and I wouldn't care.
yeah,
Um,
cause I can still remember. It's like, dude, you gotta watch some of these movies. You're sort of hesitant. It's like,
for me, it was like if it's a Godzilla wannabe, I don't want to touch it.
yeah, it seems to be I'm like the only one that dives more into the kaiju genre and trying to find
You did for a while.
some of the better stuff out there. Well, I like I introduced you to Gamera, obviously, and as
Right.
well as Ultraman, as well.
Right, yeah. There was a period of time where, yeah, you were the one who was out swimming the oceans. And I'm like, no, you're gonna get bitten by a shark, and there's a shark fin that said Gamera. I'm like, oh, no, 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 you don't want to touch that. And I'm like, okay, well, that wasn't too bad. And then there was Ultra, no, no, no. And oh, okay. And now I'm kind of going out there soon. I'm talking to you about Monster Seafood Wars and some of these other ones, and you're laughing at me, and I'm just like, no, seriously, dude, check these out. Like some of these aren't too bad. Um,
Well, it's just
but
when you showed me the cover and everything, it's like you gotta be kidding me.
no, 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 no. It is a satire kaiju
Yeah.
film, but it still is very good. Like you still need to see it. But camera too. Um, the, you know, um, it's my second favorite Gamera film. And one of the reasons why I enjoy this film is partially because of that Lake Texarkana dub. I think it's very funny. I will say, though, kind of roughly around the midway point of the film onwards, it's not quite as funny. Part of it is just because I think how the movie's constructed and just the fact, too, that there just wasn't enough necessary material to present or to lend
Well,
itself to hilarious dialogue.
well, and
Um,
then there wasn't as much of the human character elements when it was getting more and more into the fights and everything.
Well, and that too, but when you did have the character elements, most of them were significantly shorter than what you had in the first half. The first half was about trying to figure out and to explain what the heck was going on, and then once, you know, the the guano started hitting the fan, then just it was all action from that point on, more or less. Um, I feel like I'm stepping on glass here because I feel like people are going to be like, no, you know how the internet works sometimes.
Yeah.
But um, uh, I do really enjoy this film an awful lot. To be perfectly honest, I go back and forth, and I should reiterate that even though this is my second Gamera film as of this moment, there are moments in which Guardian of the Universe is my second favorite because I do love the story in that one very much as well. I will say though too, Gamera 2 is a better quality film in terms of its execution and its production than Guardian of the Universe. It's amazing where you go from 95 where Gamera gets a facelift and just looks so incredible from where he was in the Showa era to 1995. But just in 1 year's time, from 95 to 96, the incredible improvements within the effects work alone is it's just mind-boggling
Hmm.
how much of a jump that was to go from pretty good looking Gamera suit to an extraordinarily looking Gamera suit, from a fun but kind of quirky looking Gauss marionette and puppet to a Legion suit that is controlled by two men in a suit and is one of the most difficult to control kaiju suits of all time. I mean,
I would say I would say it probably looked even more difficult than operating the Bylane suit.
Milani was just massive. That was the problem with that one. But yeah, like Legion had more moving parts to it.
Hmm.
Um, but minus the Lake Texarkana dub, I do love and appreciate this film an awful lot. Guardian of the Universe and Legion kind of, like I said, trade places with me as far as my second favorite Gamera film of the series. And but I think more times than not, I lean towards two. I love the characters an awful lot in this film. I love the story. I love Legion an awful lot. Legion is an incredible villain. Um, I think the score in this film is really good. I think Ko Tani does a wonderful job of producing another fantastic Heisei Gamera score here. Um, I will say, I think as far as his scores in the trilogy, maybe Guardian of the Universe is maybe my favorite, and then it kind of gradually decreases from that point. But it's still an incredible score. Um, I like it more than I do his GMK stuff. Um, but this is still a movie that is tops for me. Not just with Gamera, but just Kaiju Eiga in general. When I think of Kaiju Eiga, Gamera 2 usually is just kind of one of those films that's just floating around my head that I think about
Hmm.
um, a lot. It's well acted, it's well written, well executed. For me, I probably would have to give it a 9.5. I love this film so much, and I just think it is such a good film.
Yeah, and when it comes to as far as you know ranking the best, hey, say it. Obviously, for me, it would have to be number two, and then Guardian of the Universe, not far behind. And then for me, third would be sort of the distant third because to me, whenever I watch that film, it's I sort of get that emo, emo depressing vibe.
Are you talking about Gamer 3?
Yeah, uh, I kind of get that deep emo vibe towards that movie, the way it is presented or executed, and with some of the characters that are in there. Not well, I know we do see some of the returning characters, but they aren't in there for too terribly long. But with some of the main characters that they use for the third one, and then as far as the really deep lore into it, I just felt sort of depressed just watching that movie.
Well, and not to go too far off a tangent into the other Gamera films, but and I think I've said this on the podcast before too, where Gamera 3 is a Gamera film that has not aged well for me. I will say this: I think the suit work, the effects work, and all that fantastic, done really well. Where I have the problem is the story. When I first saw it, odd number of years ago whenever it came out on DVD here in the States. I thought it was fantastic. Like I was like hands down, this is not only the best but my favorite Gamera movie of all time. And that's how it was up until 9 years ago. And 9 years ago, when I sat down to watch it one snowy January afternoon, that's kind of when all of a sudden I'm like, I just am not feeling it. And I thought maybe it was just the time of day, just maybe having a weird day or whatever. And I've watched it numerous times, over the last 9 years. I think I watch it at least once every year, if not more on occasion. And, you know, part three, I think, is a little overhyped. I will give it credit in terms of the effects work and suitimation. Hands down, I will give it props where it deserves.
Hmm.
But in terms of story, I think it severely lacks. So there's a lot of muddiness. I think in terms of how the story is told, there's a lot of inconsistencies and incompatibilities with a couple when it comes to connecting things with the previous couple of films. And things just aren't explained in a way that necessarily make a ton of sense either. Um, to me, part three just for me doesn't hold up as well with
Hmm.
time, but part two and part one have really improved their standing with me the last almost decade now.
Yeah, and I think that's probably uh, one of the things how I rated those three Heisei films is that I think with all the hype behind the third film, I think for me, I think I'm just when it comes to certain things that when they get too overhyped or anything, I tend to not pay attention or not watch them as much as I used to, or try not to really bother much with it. For me, I just like something
You're a
that
contrarian, is what you're saying.
basically, yeah, I just like
At least
something
you
that
admit it.
at least I like something that hasn't really been paid much attention to or overlooked. Like when we talked about the sea monster panel there.
Yeah, well, I mean, I sort of understand what you're getting. Like for me, sometimes when something gets to be hyped, there are just some times where I kind of become skeptical. I was very much a contrarian initially when the big old Harry Potter boom
Hmm.
began
Same
decade and
here.
a half ago or whatever. And then after a while, I discovered the books, and now I love the books. Um, they are very well written, and I understand why people were going bonkers over those when they were. Um, but um, I with Gamera though, I bought into the hype of like part three, and I did. I think though a lot of times for me, what I found out is if I stay off the internet for a while, like let's say 2 or 3 days, right, and then I sit down and I watch a particular movie, a movie that either most people either hate or they find to be really good. And I just sit down and I just kind of don't have the internet in my mind at that time. Kind of like I did on that day with Gamera 3. And I just take it for what it is and I just let my own self analyze it and just absorb it, take it for what it is. Then I begin to get a more honest feeling about what I truly think of a particular film. And that's kind of what happened with me that day with Gamera 3. I realized, excuse me, I had been working an awful lot and didn't do a whole lot of internet surfing for like a few days there and, just didn't want to. And came home from work one day early because there was a big snowstorm and watched Gamera 3 and 2 in that order back to back. And I was just like, I'm just not feeling it with Gamera 3. With Gamera 2, though, um, I want to say, though, too, that with the characters in this movie, I do enjoy the fact that we do get a different set of characters. Sure,
Some of the same characters,
you
mainly
do
that
get,
one dude, the one
yeah,
crazy dude.
Yeah, basically a cameo in this film. Uh, but I do like the fact that we take a different approach this time. It's a great sort of reversal because in the first movie, it was more about the scientists. Here, it's more about the military, or should I say, the self-defense force, and
Hmm.
kind of their point of view in terms of how they're handling a crisis. Whether that was
Intentional or not.
yeah, whether or not that was intentional, I'm not sure. Um, but I really enjoy that aspect of this film is that you got, and that's part of the reason too why, now that I think about it, maybe that I also that one also trades places with part two for me sometimes is that these two, in terms of the human characters, kind of complement each other. You got more of the scientists in one of them, and then you got more of the self-defense force in the other. And it's not the same thing all throughout, although some people like the continuity, and technically you do get continuity, but you don't have the same exact characters from part one being the main characters in parts two and three.
Hmm.
Um, but I really do love the characters in this film. Yeah, you still do have some of the scientists. You got um, oh, what's her name? Honami. You got her in the film. She is kind of the scientist, but it's still more self defense force focused in terms of the approach,
Well, and then I would
or should I say the point of view?
and then I would have to say the only one that sort of links all three movies together as far as the cast is that one girl that has that sort of the psychic abilities that's she's sort of tied with Gamera and how she and like she can feel how Gamera feels at times or she can direct Gamera to go somewhere. That's like in the entire Heisei series, I think that's the only character that has continuity throughout the entire series. And I forget her name at the moment. Let me see here if I can. Hold on. Go to Gamer Guardian of the Universe. Uh, I can't remember the name right now. But yeah, I think you know what I'm talking about. Is that one gal with that kind of like that pearl-like stone that's sort of like a shape as a 9 or a 6.
hmm Yeah, yeah, it's Steven Seagal's daughter. Yeah, I understand what you're saying. Yeah, I forget her character's name too. Uh, yeah, the name escapes me at the very moment, but
Oh, here it is. Ayako Fujitani.
oh, that's right, that's right. Yep, that's right.
Says it right here. A young girl who forms a spiritual bond with Gamera.
Well, I mean, it's true.
Yeah, but yeah, she's the only uh, character that has continuity throughout. So
hmm Yeah. Um. So, what do you think? And I think, unlike some of the films we've discussed, what do you think the impact of Gamera 2 is just kind of on the Gamera saga? And just to kind of be a spoiler alert, because I think it's very obvious, like the impact this has had on Kaiju Iga.
hmm well, I think I would say at least up to that point before Gamer 3 came around, I think it had quite a bit of impact as far as sort of the well, I think it sort of started with Gamer, but Gamer Guardian of the Universe. But I think when Gamer 2 came around, I think it sort of rejuvenated a lot of the men in suit sort of aspect, like where you can marry both the suitmation as well as visual effects together, like really well improved visual effects at the time. And then that's sort of right at the time when uh was it Super Eye Productions sort of revived the Ultraman character, starting with Ultraman Tiga, because I know they've been on hiatus at that point for about a decade and a half, and then they sort of revived Ultra, the Ultra franchise and haven't really stopped since. So I would say with Gamer Guardian of the Universe in this film, I think it really revived a lot of the suitmation uh, aspect, as well as uh, good special effects in combination with those two things. And I think it sort of made a good impact, not just on like some of the Japanese cinema, but for some of the other uh, independent creators of doing suitmation as well as appreciating the suitmation technique.
Hmm. Yeah, I think the impact on this thing with the Gamera saga, I mean, was impactful. With Kaiju Egg, I mean, I can't, obviously speak for fans in Japan, but I know here in the West, the Heisei Gamera trilogy is like considered gold standard in terms of Kaiju Ega, and even more if you want to get even more specific, Part Three. But again, like we talked about here a bit ago, I think I personally think that needs to be slightly reconsidered to some degree. But um, yeah, it's part of that package of being considered the gold standard. And like you said, especially with kind of the classic methods of monster movie making, and now the fact too, especially since the late 80s slash early 90s, when computer graphics started really coming in and really doing their thing, um, marrying those two um, effects methods together, I mean, it really showed that you can do it well and effectively. I will argue, though, that the Heisei Godzilla series was already doing that. But what the Heisei Gamera trilogy did was that they took, I would argue, what they took to the next level that the Heisei Godzilla era sadly either couldn't or
Missed.
just didn't was
It was
more
kind of a
of
missed opportunity.
suit articulation. Um, the interesting thing is, like, for example, you look at the Mothra marionettes throughout most of the Showa era, and especially from that 64 film, you get a lot of articulation from that Mothra in the head and the feet and a number of shots. You look at the adult Mothra marionette in the 92 film, it is pretty darn stiff.
Really,
And I
yeah.
like that movie,
That
but it
that and
is,
Batra.
yeah, I mean, a lot of the flying marionette kaiju of the Heisei Godzilla saga sadly are stiff, and as a result, don't come close to looking even remotely believable. Like, it sort of takes you out of the movie a bit too, because you realize, okay, it's moving so stiff, like it literally does look like a toy.
Mm.
Um, so I what the Gamera um, what the Gamera trilogy did, even right out of the gate in 1995, was bring you more articulation within the suits of all the kaiju involved, and it got better as time went on. Also, the suit making process in terms of the not just the design necessarily, because that can be sort of subjective, but in terms of the detail and again, just points of articulation just got better with each installment. Although I would argue Iris, I thought, was a little bit of a step back. Iris seemed too stiff, but I think that's kind of how it was supposed to be. But
But but then
that's
but then they also mixed with visual effects with that
Well,
specific
yeah. I
kaiju.
mean, to me, I mean, I do like Iris, but it was always one of those. I mean, I get it. I understand that that's probably how it was supposed to be. But even then, regardless of whether or not it was supposed to be that stiff, I still am
Yeah,
kind of in the middle of the road on Iris.
and
But
one of the things whenever I think of Iris, I think of something that came along the lines of the Evangelion anime.
yeah, and I mean, the it really its impact was very noticeable because um, I think Toho to some degree when they brought the Millennium era in, you could tell they tried to do better.
Hmm.
And in some cases, I think best case scenario they kind of sort of did, but otherwise it was more of kind of where they left off in '95. And again, part of it just could be the fact that Toho is very notorious for short production schedules, and
Well,
that probably affected
and
it
then
too.
they did bring in Kaneko and to do GMK, but it's even with his direction on that specific film, they you can still see that there is some of the stiffness in some of the suit mate and some of the suitmation, even with Mothra, like you mentioned, the Heisei version and this Millennium one, it looked even more stiff.
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, and part of it though too, I remember reading that Kaneko was not thrilled with Toho's short shooting schedule, and he blamed Toho for any deficiencies within GMK. And I will say, I don't think GMK is
It's
really.
not much of a good film.
And I know that sounds blasphemous and all that. Again, it's our opinion. I'm just not a fan of it. I think there's a lot that's just working against that particular. I give an A for effort. I think the general idea that they were going for is unique and interesting. I just think in terms of execution is where that particular film really falls flat on its face.
Mm.
But two's impact. I mean, and that whole trilogy. I mean, you have to really talk about the whole trilogy. I mean, it's there. You know, 1999 with Gamera 3, you're talking what now? 22 years later?
For Gamera 2.
Yeah. No, I
Yeah,
mean no, 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 no. I mean Gamera 3. No, yeah, you're talking like 22 years later for Gamera 3. I mean, just a little over 2 decades later, fans here in the West are still holding that film up. Uh, I mean, excuse me, that whole trilogy. I'm getting confused because we're talking about so many different films at once here. Fans are still holding that trilogy up as like this is how you do kaiju movies in the traditional sense.
mm.
Man in suit mixed with your computer effects and what have you. Um, and I think when we talk about its legacy with the fans and all that, I mean, by and large, we've already kind of covered that too. This thing, unlike when we discussed Hedora and we kind of wondered, maybe once the boomer generation kind of fades, is kind of the love and popularity of that film, is that going to wane? I think it's the exact opposite with not just Gamera 2, but again, that whole trilogy, in that this trilogy I think will always be held up by fans for generations to come until the end of humanity as like one of the best ways, if not the best ways, to do kaiju ega, and definitely in a traditional sense, that's how they're going to feel. And I mean, that's a huge deal. I mean, major props to Kaneko and Dae and Katakawa, for doing what they did here with this trilogy. I mean, they didn't rush Kaneko. They, by and large, with some give and take, gave Kaneko the amount of time he needed. And I mean, this is kind of what happens when you work with the directors and all that, instead of you being the studio going, no, we got to have a movie out this, by this date. It's got to be by this date. If you aren't done, we just are going to be like, you know what, we're still going to put it out even if it's not finished. um, they worked with Kaneko, and you see the results
Hmm.
on screen.
Hmm. Yeah, and I think that's one of the things too. I think more or less some of these studios uh, that are sort of strict with a lot of things. So,
I was just about to do that exact same thing.
it's that when they're very strict and have and are just dead set on everything and or interfere, the product just really suffers, and you see that quite a bit with some of the films that have been hyped up, but then have become a huge letdown when they are released in that respect. And I think more and more studios, I think, need to tend to let these directors sort of have their way and take their time with a lot of things. And I think that's one of the things with nowadays. You see some of these smaller studios popping up where, because some of the producers or directors sort of get tired with some of these mainlined studios that we've been known for decades, like Warner Brothers, Universal, Disney, those sorts of things. And I think that's one of the things too, so that they can escape from that whole like strict deadlines or interference. It's just have your own independent studio to where that you get more of the creative freedom.
Yeah, the problem with a lot of smaller studios, though, obviously, is that you don't really get the budgets a lot of times that you want for very obvious reasons. Um,
Well, and I think that's sort of where you kind of partner up with some of these mainline studios where they have the money and the distribution reach. And I think with that, even though that you can partner up with some of these mainline studios, you still get more of the creative freedom with your independent studio in front of you.
mhm. Yeah. Sorry, my son just kind of interrupted me, and I lost my train of thought. Please take over for for a moment here.
um, as far as like, I think we haven't really talked much of the characters in this.
Oh, I thought we did.
Did we? Um,
I mean, that was like the first thing we discussed.
well, um, as far as the visual effects, how do you think it holds up after 25 years?
I mean, they hold up incredibly well, in my opinion. I mean, again, regardless, you're going to get some people out there, and most of them are people who are um, just not fans of this particular genre, that are going to look at man in suit type of effects and think that they're incredibly silly and laughable. Um, I still think they hold up really well. There are some things one could argue that, um, you know, maybe certain improvements or tweaks here and there would have done well. But I think at the same time, you're looking at it from the vantage point of 25 years ago. And sometimes you need to remind yourself that that's 25 years ago, that it's not now. Technology and mechanics and stuff were different then than what they are now. And sure, if they were to do that same thing today, yeah, it would look vastly different from, what it did then. And so, given the context of when the movie was made and kind of the budget and that sort of thing, you know, I I mean, it's incredible. I mean, it's still spectacular. I mean, I can throw in a bunch of positive adjectives in here. I think it holds up very, very well. Everything still looks great. The suits look great. The A lot of the computer effects, CGI, look great as well. It still amazes me, even 25 years later, that a film still looks good. And you occasionally still will find films that look really good 25 years later, but that almost seems to be something that is it doesn't happen very often, where you find a film like a Jurassic Park, where even 25, or even for that film, it's pushing 30 years now, that still looks really good, X amount of years or decades later. And I
Hmm.
think that, again, that's just a testament to the studio in terms of working with the director and the producers and saying, okay, what are you looking at roughly for a budget? We'll try to accommodate you as best as we can. And also, what are you looking at for production time? We will try to accommodate you as best as we can there. And then, more or less, kind of letting the crew do their thing, and putting faith in that team. And again, like I said a bit ago, the results are there on the screen. So
Hmm. Yeah. Um, let's see what else haven't we not discussed yet? Um, boy, I can't really think of anything. Well, I do have one thing that just came into mind, and I know throughout the entire Gamera Heisei trilogy, the Gamera throughout these three films, the appearance has changed dramatically, particularly in the third film. Um, what are your thoughts of them not sticking with the Gamera suit from Gamera Guardians of the Universe and just sort of kept changing the look of the character throughout the entire Heisei, even though it's sort of the like ba- basically these three films are continuity with one another.
I mean, look, and this is probably just the nearly 30-year fan in me talking, but it doesn't bother me. I think when I first got into this, um, genre, yeah, I would kind of be like, man, why are they making such severe and incredible changes um, to this? I think it was jarring for me initially, because I didn't quite understand the fact that, okay, yeah, suits wear out, they got to change them, or sometimes they're approaching a different type of theme or tone to a film, and as a result, they want the monsters to kind of look a specific way. Sometimes it's just like, look, we just want a new suit to work. Maybe the technology was there. Like I said, I think this Gamera 2 suit is a bit more articulate and expressive than what we got in part one, and they're very similar in terms of the capabilities that they had. This one, though, I think does it slightly better, and it's like, well, why not? If you have the budget and you got the time to put it together, um, why not go ahead and do that? Changing the looks and stuff just doesn't bother me anymore. And again, a lot of that's probably just the nearly 30-year fan in me talking, who just has seen these films so many times and is accustomed to that. It doesn't bother me. Whereas, I think a lot of people initially who come into this, who don't know much, if anything, about them, are probably slightly whiplash induced. But once, if you stick around long enough, you understand why. But then at the same time too, it just in general doesn't bother you.
Hmm. Yeah, when I first noticed this, I didn't really know what to think about it, and I think I didn't really think too much into it, but I know it sort of lingered in the back of my head from time to time whenever I watch these films. Like, even though it's sort of a continuation uh, with one another, even with the MonsterVerse, although Godzilla changed a bit from the 2014 to the 2019 film, but sort of the same design, the same look aspect was still there on that
Hmm.
Godzilla. But yeah, with this one, you can definitely tell the drastic changes from one film to the next. But yeah, just like you, I just didn't really think too much about it, although it sort of lingered in my head for a long time. It's like, what was the reason behind them changing it so much, even though it's a continuation of from the previous movie in that regard? But yeah, so like what you said is probably more of the sort of the aspect of what kind of film that they were trying to uh, make for that specific film. So,
Hmm.
but yeah, I can't really think too much of anything else unless if you knew what you were trying to talk about before you forgot.
I haven't been able to remember, no.
Well, other than that, I can't think of much of anything else. I really don't want to dive too much into like Tex Arcana Gamera, so I think everyone knows what that's all about.
It's ridiculous. It's still, comedy is subjective and all. And typically for me, a lot of times when it comes to comedy, if I see something enough times, it doesn't become quite as funny anymore because the gags and stuff a lot of the times. But that is still a film. I mean, I don't necessarily laugh as hard as I did initially when I first saw it, but it's still one of those where I can still sit down and watch it and still get some decent laughs occasionally out of it.
Hmm. Yeah, but if you don't have anything else,
I mean, we've been praising this film up and down for a while now because there really is very little negative I have to say about it. I mean, I'm trying to be objective about it as well. I love this film so much. I think it's a well-made film. Yeah, but 25 years later, you could argue and that maybe certain aspects of the production are look a little antiquated, but again, it's like, so what? Things change and things improve with time. I mean, that's just kind of how things are. Movies that are made now that are maybe hailed as marvels won't be considered such 2, 3, 4 decades down the road. So I mean, it's all relative, and you just got to keep reminding yourself, that's kind of just how things were and the capabilities that they had during that time. But it's a well-made movie. Like I said, between this and Gamera, Guardian of the Universe, they're kind of my second favorite films of the Gamera saga. I love it so much. And again, I just have to stress this. I think to people who really just hate on Lake Texarkana Gamera, I mean, you got to lighten up. I mean, a lot of you love Mystery Science Theater 3000 and Riff Tracks, but yet you take offense to something like Lake
well,
Texarkana Gamera
and
2, and it
and two,
just
and two in the early seasons of MST3K, they also ripped on Showa Gamera films. So,
Well, I mean, the reason why I think so many people get upset about it is because they love this trilogy so much, they feel like it's untouchable, and that's where I have a problem with that. It's just kind of like, no, everything can be turned into a comedy with the right approach to it. You may not
mhm.
necessarily think it's funny, but I think for people to really harp on it and to the extent that they do, I think um, it's very ironic because, like I said, a lot of the same folks enjoy things like Mystery Science Theater 3000 and Rift Tracks and what have you. It's kind of ironic, and I think it's um, very silly. It's like they're movies, guys. Like, just up a little bit. If you don't think it's funny, then that's fine. But
But yeah, if
it's
you
what
if
helped me to fall in love with this movie a bit more.
yeah, it's like if you think that you like the MST3K and the riff tracks thing, riffing on some of these movies, even some of the show Gamera, and I think a couple of Godzilla movies too, if I remember. But then,
They did, yeah.
yeah, you have a different studio doing something a little bit similar, but actually dubbing over the voices of the characters, and then adding some ridiculous music to it. Uh, but then you get offended by it, then I think you might have some kind of problem. No offense, but
Yeah, I just again, I just think too many people. I just think too many people. I don't. I keep forgetting kind of exactly how I want to say it, but I don't think they're self aware sometimes, and I get that way too. But it's just kind of like just you take things too seriously sometimes. You just got to kind of lighten up. I've learned to do that too. Like initially, I remember odd number of years ago, I heard Riff Trax was doing a deal on the '98 Godzilla film, and initially I was mad, and then a few years later, I'm like, why should I be mad? In fact, it's actually going to get more exposure to this movie, and I've already seen, over the years, a lot of people have warmed up to that film more, and I don't know if Riff Trax had anything to do with that or not, but it's just
hmm
kind of like, so what? Like,
yeah, yeah, definitely. But yeah, if you don't have anything else, then we can probably close out the panel here.
yeah, I mean, thank you so much for joining us. We hope you enjoyed the panel and are continuing to enjoy Daikaiju Fest 2021. And we'll see you guys at some point in July.
All right, see you guys in the next panel.